Well, this morning tributes have been pouring in from across the world to the chairman of Apple, Steve Jobs, whose death was announced in the early hours of this morning. He's been described as a genius by some, and he leaves an estimated $8.3 billion. He'd been suffering from pancreatic cancer. Shortly after he was diagnosed with the disease, Mr. Jobs delivered a speech at Stanford University. Here's an extract of that speech.
My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes.
Steve Jobs giving his outlook on life and death at Stanford University. Well, Tim Bahiran is an analyst with Creative Strategies Incorporated in California. He knew Steve Jobs personally. I spoke to him a short time ago. We began by discussing that Stanford address, part of which you've just been hearing.
Well, it said a great deal. One key thing that he stated in that speech that is very important is how much he fell in love with calligraphy. And in that context, it was one of the things that caused him to really think about design and the beauty of everything from letters and words. And amazingly, that had its roots in his interest in everything from architecture to what eventually became a real passion with him, which was style and elegance in industrial design. And then the other thing that really struck me is, as you know, by the time he gave that speech in 2005, he'd already been diagnosed with this cancer. And for the first time we'd ever have heard him really speak about his mortality. And he, in two contexts of this, 2 points of the speech, where he talked about, not being afraid to die, and more importantly, that if you live, do it with what you love. And it was a very telling. And actually, many people who have seen that speech consider it one of the best graduation speeches they've ever heard.
When was the last time you met Steve Jobs?
Well, he was with us at the Developers Conference in June. He took the stage and did part of the demos, but he was very, very frail at that point. So that when he gave notice, I think it was in August, that he was stepping down, it really was not much of a surprise to a lot of us.
You spent probably 3 decades tracking him, dealing with him, dealing with his company. What about the future of Apple now that Steve Jobs has died?
Yeah, that's an important question. I mean, one thing that you'll note that if you followed Steve like I have is that he's a visionary, and he was not a short-term visionary. When he thought about products and thought about things that he was going to do, he actually broached them in the context of almost a 10-year plan. And it's been very clear. If you look at the products that have been developed just in the last 10 years alone, there was a grand design behind it. And the thing that's very comforting is that it's very clear that Tim Cook and Phil Schiller and all of the team have been with him now for, some of them, 15, 16 years, and they know how Steve thought. They know how he would make decisions. And they had a very strong sense of his ideas behind design. And you've got guys like Johnny Ives, who clearly will carry the vision for the design itself, and who was the most influential even to Steve on a lot of the design issues. So I actually believe that you probably won't see any real changes in the sense of the roadmaps, because most of the products that you'll see coming up the next 3 years were already designed, years ago and have Steve's stamp on it. The bigger question will be, perhaps 5-6 years from now, when most of the stuff that will be coming out of Apple is coming out strictly from the imagination of this team. And the good news, as I said, is that they will want to carry Steve's legacy forward. And because they've all spent so much time with him and know how he thinks, I actually think they'll do a pretty good job.
With regard to Steve Jobs, he has fans, not customers, which is quite unusual for somebody in his position. Knowing him as you did, how did he wear that? How did he deal with that? Was he conscious of it?
He was in a sense that he knew that people recognized his gifts and his talent. But it was funny. Those who especially were close to him will tell you that never went to his head. And more importantly, he was more concerned really about creating products that were great and easy to use and were stylish and more importantly, what people would want. And in that context, he was more nose to the grindstone. I don't think he ever was inflated by the way people thought of him. I think he was very grounded in that sense. And that came out, by the way, very strong in his Stanford speech.
Analyst Tim Bahiran speaking to us from California a short time ago.